Yeah,
It's gonna be like I'm not part of Facebook.
He's like, Mark, you better lawyer up because I'm coming.
Hey, what's up, you guys? Welcome back to yet another episode of Zillennial Money. This is episode 22. And as always, I am the world's greatest podcast host. My name's Andy. In case this is your first time here, why don't I let the guys introduce themselves as well?
Hey, what's going on, everyone? This is Dominic here. So please be sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe to the main channel as well as the Clips channel and all of our personal channels too. And let's get the ball rolling here. Let's do it.
Hey guys, Tristan here. We've got a pretty great show lined up for you this week. So I'll send it back to Andy to take us away.
Yeah, for sure. So we do have another packed docket for y'all this week. So this week, let's not waste any more time and jump right into the topic that everyone wants to hear about every single week. And we're super happy to talk about it every single week as well. And that is, of course, Bitfarms. Bitfarms was up huge today, by the way. I think it closed up like 15% or something like that. Welcome news, and we'll explain exactly why it went up huge today. But the big news before we get to that is this whole thing that Bitfarms has ongoing with Riot, right? So in case you guys are not filled in on the news, basically what happened was Riot, another Bitcoin miner, was trying to buy Bitfarms, and Bitfarms didn't want to sell to Riot, and Riot is trying to attempt a hostile takeover. At least that's what it appears to be the case, where they keep on stacking Bitfarms shares and trying to they're also trying to push for board changes and all this stuff. They're trying to get people appointed to the board. That Bitfarms' current board doesn't want new people. They're trying to push for these new governance changes. So basically, we got an update on this news quite recently this week, which is Bitfarms adopting a poison pill, or rather, this is officially called a shareholders' rights plan. So the press release was a bit complicated, right? So I have a screenshot of the press release right here. I'm not going to go through the details of this because, to be honest, I didn't fully understand 100% of this either. But from what I do understand, what is going on here is that because Bitfarms is trying to fight off this hostile takeover from Riot, Riot needs to stack a certain percentage of shares before they're able to actually take over this company, take over Bitfarms. So I've heard that Canadian laws require 66%, but some people are like, no, it's the same as the US. It requires only 51%. But regardless, Riot's not close to that yet. But they're trying to get to that point, right? So regardless of whether it's 51 or 66%, they're continuing to stack shares. And in fact, today we got the news that they actually got up to 14.0%. So this news was just released right before we started this show. They now own 14.0% of Bitfarms. So apparently this poison pill hasn't stopped them from acquiring more Bitfarms. But first of all, I'm getting ahead of myself. What is this poison pill, right? So this poison pill, basically, the idea is that you want to prevent any singular entity from accumulating a large percentage of the shares. So they set the threshold to 15%, where if a company, Riot or any other company for that matter, if they get up to 15% or more, Bitfarms can issue more shares and give those new shares to everyone besides the company that owns 15%. So if you think about practically how this would work, is that pretend you're Riot and you're trying to stack 51% of Bitfarms so that you can do a hostile takeover. Well, you buy, and then you get to 15%, and then all of a sudden, the company Bitfarms issues more shares to everyone besides you. So it's kind of like they're diluting only you. and it's going to be progressively harder and harder for you to stack more shares to gain like a percentage increase in the amount of shares you own of Bitfarms. So basically, that's what it means, right? So you can get up to 15%, but if you try to buy more shares, you're going to have a lot more issues, and you're going to get diluted, and you're going to have to spend ever more amounts of money to accumulate more shares. So this is a tactic that was, if you guys recall, used in the Twitter acquisition. So Elon Musk wanted to buy Twitter, and then Twitter at first didn't want to sell it to him. So they were talking about adopting potentially a similar plan like this called the poison pill, right? And that would prevent Elon Musk from buying it. But that saga unfolded a lot differently in the end.
Yeah, because it was like mid-story too. I was getting invested. I'm like, oh shit, dilution? This is some social network sheet. I was gonna mention that. It reminds me of like that one scene in the Social Network. I'm like, dang, yo.
The one guy getting diluted.
Yeah,
It's gonna be like I'm not part of Facebook.
He's like, Mark, you better lawyer up because I'm coming for everything.
And he's just gone. Is he coming back? Power went out.
I guess I should pick up where I left off, but I have no idea where I left off. Literally, I was in the middle of a sentence, and then everything just goes black.
Yeah,
like, you guys probably didn't see it because like usually I just froze for you guys, right? But like on my end, it was like I was just talking, and then like everything goes black.
Yeah. I was just like, I was like, Andy did not lose internet. Andy just died. Like,
yeah, no,
his computer is off.
I was like, what is happening right now? Like, what? And this is like Zillennial money history. Like, what is happening?
No, because it started raining, and I didn't think too much of it, and I was like, I hope the noise doesn't get into the recording. And then like it just got super bad all of a sudden. But yeah, anyways, could you guys jog my memory as to exactly where I was?
You were explaining the Bitfarms poison pill and the dilution aspect and stuff like that.
I remember. Yeah, you mentioned like 15%, and then they're diluting after 15%, and then
everyone gets diluted, but Riot. Sorry, no, Riot gets diluted, and everyone else doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, basically, I think that's it. Like, I was done explaining the poison pill, so like that's the way that it works, right? For those audience members who are welcome back, or I guess I should say welcome back to myself, because you guys probably never left, and I was the one that left. But yeah, anyway, so let's jump back right into it. So yeah, anyway, so Bitfarms has this poison pill thing, and then you would think that Riot would start backing off, right? Because it's like you can never accumulate more than like 15% feasibly in that case once the poison pill is implemented, because every time you try, you'll just get diluted until you get back down to 15%, right? But it hasn't stopped Riot, because as I said earlier in the show, they went up back. They kept on buying, and then now they're up to 14.0% ownership of Bitfarms as a whole. Yeah, with regards to Bitfarms' response to this and why they adopted this poison pill and why like they didn't want Riot to buy them out, Bitfarms released this statement actually. So you guys scroll to the second or third photo on the docket. Basically, it's like, we're committed to maximizing shareholder value, and we don't believe that Riot acquiring us will be maximizing shareholder value, which I don't know, to me it seems perfectly reasonable, right? Yeah, it just says plainly like they're not holding back, because like when they released their initial statement previously, they were like, oh yeah, no, we don't believe that this is like a good offer. And then right here on Twitter, they just didn't hold back. They went like full savage mode. It's like Riot's interests are not aligned with Bitfarms shareholders, and their attacks are efforts to push their lowball bid. So yeah, basically they went like full Wendy's Twitter account on Riot. So yeah, anyways, that's pretty much all I had for this, like with regards to this poison pill. We do have a second part to this story where Bitfarms announced an expansion, but I think we can leave that part for a little bit later. But first, I wanted to get you guys' thoughts on what you think of this poison pill, what you think Riot is gonna do, and like what's the end game for Riot, right? Like what's the end game here? Because they keep stacking shares and they're getting up to that 15% now, which they're at risk of triggering the poison pill if they're going to stack any more shares. So like, do you think they'll get up to like, 14.9 maybe? And then what, right? Like what's their end game? What do you guys think?
Yeah, so I think I'm not really sure what Riot's playing at. Like I think maybe it's just trying to acquire Bitfarm shares at a low price. I feel like now that the poison pill has been implemented, I think that it's going to be pretty difficult for them to take over Bitfarms using a hostile takeover, particularly with the amount of cash reserves and cash equivalents that Riot has. And especially when you consider the fact that if Riot starts trying to buy out Bitfarms, they're going to have to deploy a lot of that cash reserves into that attempt. And the potential for that to backfire is a much higher with the hostile with the poison pill being implemented. So I think from that perspective, it doesn't really make a lot of sense for Riot to keep pursuing beyond the 14.9 mark because of the risk to their own shareholders. So if they're trying to maximize shareholder value for Riot shareholders, acquiring Bitfarms at like a 90% like premium, which will be effectively what they'll end up doing, that or more, is going to, okay, maybe I'm exaggerating a little with the 90, but like they're going to be acquiring it for a significant premium. They're not getting a discount on it anymore. And even with the discount that they were attempting to get, that was still a substantial amount of money for Riot to come up with to acquire Bitfarms in the first place. So even if they try to do it using this method, I think that the risk to their own shareholders compared to just populating their Corsica location and just buying miners and paying attention to their own backyard instead of looking at Bitfarms' backyard. Like it's kind of like Riot is sitting there with a desert in its backyard, and then it's looking over the fence at Bitfarms, which has got like some children's toys strewn around, but besides that is fine. And they're just like, oh, the management's not doing a good job. Well, their scenarios, their whole place is like, a complete desert. Everything's terrible. It's just like, I think that if they're trying to actually maximize things for their own shareholders, pursuing this Bitfarms actual acquisition is a complete is not very intelligent. I think that they can get the 14.9%, and then if they want to hold that and then sell the shares when they've made a profit, that's like not the worst plan for Riot shareholders. But if they keep trying to pursue over the 14.9 into a 15, starting that poison pill, I think that they will find very quickly that they will be paying a lot more money than they want to be paying for Bitfarms. And that factor will probably cause some issues shareholder wise. So I think that if they're smart, their management won't continue pursuing this past 14.9, because I think that if I were a shareholder of Riot and they were pursuing this acquisition that was going to be most likely costing me a lot of money, I would be looking to change that management team if I was a shareholder. So I think in that regard, I think that hopefully they have the foresight to not continue after the 14.9, But we'll have to see what Riot actually ends up doing. I think that, and just to round this off, I think that Bitfarms enacting the poison pill is actually good. And the reason for that is that while I know that I could be diluted, I think that being acquired by Riot at a significant discount would cost a lot more than the risk of some dilution being kicked into the mix, right? And I think that in that regard, it's not like they can't at a later date do a reverse stock split or whatever it is, stock merger to reduce the number of shares or whatever, if they need to. Not that it really matters at the end of the day how many shares there are, as long as your position size hasn't been reduced. But I think that in that regard, I think that Bitfarms needed to protect itself, and I think that Riot is acting in bad faith by undervaluing Bitfarms and attacking their operations via this purchasing of shares and their continued criticism of the leadership. And it's not to say that Bitfarms doesn't have things to be criticized on. It's just that the way that Riot's going about it, particularly when Riot's bed is not made at home, it just seems a bit rich.
My bed is not made at home either, but I am not Bitfarms or Riot, although I do own shares in Bitfarms and not Riot. Anyways, Dom, you want to provide your thoughts? What do you think of this whole poison pill thing? What do you think Riot's end game is?
Yeah, as for like the poison pill thing, I guess it's a good way to combat with like Riot's like pressurized push. Like I think if they want to be like a part of themselves, like independently, I guess this is not a bad idea. Because if I was in Riot's shoes, it wouldn't make any sense to go past that 15% threshold because, like, why would you? What's the point? Because after 15%, dilution happens, and then that's just no benefit to Riot in itself. So I'm sure they're gonna try to find an alternative method, but I think this poison pill's good for now. And yeah, I'll just say like we'll wait and see what happens. But as for right now, for the price of Bitfarms, it's really nice for all of us. So hope that keeps rising. So yeah, I'll say that.
Yeah, actually, regarding the price of Bitfarms, the one question that came to mind was, do you think that if Riot was denied this opportunity to acquire Bitfarms, do you think that they will dump all their shares in anger? Because they do own 14% of the company now, right? And that's a lot of shares if they were to try and dump them all at once. And that could be a big negative catalyst for us as Bitfarm shareholders. Which, yeah, like Tristan, what do you think about that? Let me just toss the question to you first.
Yeah, so I think that they would be really stupid to do that. And that's not just like because I don't want them to do that. Because obviously I don't want them to do that, because dumping their shares and tanking the stock price would be, not good for my position that I have in Bitfarms as I am a shareholder of Bitfarms. But really what it comes down to is that if Riot wants to be maximizing value for shareholders, their own shareholders, they should be trying to get as much of a profit on this as possible. And if they dump all their shares at all at once, the likelihood that they tank the stock beyond where they are profitable on their selling becomes a lot higher. So if I were Riot, I would probably reduce the size of my position, or based on what they seem to be doing, maybe acquire up to that 14.9 and try and place my own board members onto their board in order to facilitate an acquisition at a later date, which I think is actually what they're going to try and do. So if I were them, I wouldn't be looking to sell the shares all at once. If I was looking to sell the shares, it would be a slow, like a few, like a couple million here and there kind of deal, rather than like the entire position or a large amount of the position. I'd be looking to kind of sell it as it goes up, and then funnel that money back into my own company. that being said, it seems that Riot seems to like sitting on cash and not invest that money into their own company. So maybe they'll just hang out and hold the shares and sell them at a high point. Maybe they'll dump it. I would say that the management at Riot seems a little bit petty, it seems to me, because they seem to be targeting Bitfarms pretty aggressively. And I don't think that it's past their pettiness to ignore the shareholder value and dump the shares for a massive amount, for a massive decrease in Bitfarms value. Again, we'll have to kind of see what happens, but if I were them, I would slow sell them.
I mean, if you watched previous episodes of this show, I think I've already kind of made my opinion pretty clear on this whole situation. But in my opinion, I think what's happening here between Riot and Bitfarms is Riot is, or especially the CEO of Riot, Jason Les, he's a professional poker player. So I think he's kind of viewing this as a whole game of poker, right? It's like who blinks first. So I think he did some calculations in his head and figured out that no matter what happens, he still sort of wins, right? So if he's able to buy Bitfarms at $2.30 US per share, obviously that's going to be a huge win for him. If he's not able to, then he can get up to 14.9% of Bitfarms, which looks like he's about to hit that 14.9 very soon, which like part of the reason I think why Bitfarms stock went up today was because Riot is still buying, right? So not only are they not selling, they're still in the process of buying more shares. So I think they will get up to that 14.9%. And then after that, it's like, Bitfarms is by all metrics that like Bitcoin mining companies are measured at. Bitfarms is probably at like the lowish undervalued point. Again, not financial advice, but this is just, some statistics I've seen, which, given that Riot was buying all of their shares at around 230 or, maybe a slightly above that, I think that they did the calculation that it was undervalued. So their stake in Bitfarms, 14 or 15%, whatever it ends up being, is going to be worth a lot more in the future. So they still win, right? So whether they are able to acquire Bitfarms or not able to, they win either way. So I think that that's kind of the end game. And I think that, I mean, I can't speak for Riot, obviously, because I'm not in the head of the CEO. But if I was the CEO of Riot, I would hold on to Bitfarms, those shares, because it's going to be accretive to Riot shareholders as well when Bitfarms runs up now, right? So that's just kind of my opinion. I think that this story is kind of maybe going to fizzle out, right? So Riot's going to get up to that 14.9%, and then they're probably just going to hold, and they're going to, bitch and whine about not being able to like buy Bitfarms. But this poison pill, I think essentially it sabotages all the plans that Riot has at ever acquiring Bitfarms at the price that they wanted to. So anyways, Dom, do you have anything more to add, or shall we move on to the second part of this story? Maybe somewhat related to what we were talking about with Riot. So I mentioned that earlier that Riot is still in the process of buying more Bitfarms shares. And I think that Bitfarms is using this opportunity to tap their ATM, right? So in case you guys forget how an ATM is supposed to work, not an automatic teller machine, but an at the market equity program, which is a program that allows Bitfarms to issue more shares. It's kind of like an ATM in real life, right? It prints money these days, because all the shares that they're printing, they're just selling to Riot, who's buying them up. And I think that Bitfarms has made a lot of money by tapping their ATM and selling their shares to Riot, who's gobbling them up, and then they're using this money that they earn from their ATM to fund expansion, which is accretive to shareholder value, right? And I think that that's why people kind of are not maybe clear-headed towards an ATM at first, because it's like, oh, I hate dilution. It's dilution. Yes, it is dilution, but if they are using the money to add to more expansion, then it could be accretive to shareholders, even if you get diluted. So I think that that's something that people should really be clear-headed about. And this is an example of what I'm talking about, right? So Bitfarms just entered into an agreement to develop a 120 megawatt facility. And I believe this is in Pennsylvania in the US. And this is going to support 8 additional exahashes in 2025 when it's done. And also in the process of getting that 8 exahash up and running, it's going to 600 petahash of that, which is, I think 600 petahash is 0.6 exahash, right? So 0.6 exahash of that is going to be available in 2024. So Bitfarms has already released their plan to get up to 21 exahash. So I'm guessing this puts them at 21.6 exahash by the end of 2024. And yeah, basically this news was really welcome because again, we like to see expansion. We like to see companies expand their hash rate, expand their megawatt hours capacity. And if you guys recall, last week we talked about the interview with Ben Gannon, the chief mining officer of Bitfarms, who said, getting the power, getting the facility is really like the bottleneck, right? Because they already have contracts for the machines, and they can already have they have the option to purchase more machines at a fixed price. But it's like you really want to make sure you have a place to put those machines before you actually buy the machines, right? Because getting the power agreements and getting just the land, the facilities is a very non-trivial matter. And I'm glad that Bitfarms is expanding into that and providing updated guidance. So with this, guidance, with this kind of new power agreements and this new facility, they've upped their 2025 guidance to 35 exahash, over 35. But 35 is kind of like their benchmark for 2025 expansion. So wanted to get you guys' thoughts. I guess we'll start with Tristan again, and then take it away.
Yeah, so I was pretty pleased to see their 2025 plan. Moving up to 35 exahash is still a considerable gain from here. So that does represent a lot of growth on their side. And more importantly, since the market is forward looking, this will help drive the the stock price a lot sooner, like in current time frame, even though those gains won't be met until the future. So in that regard, we can get a lot of value from the stock in the short term, even though the the gain itself percentage wise is a lot less. But I think it's also something that is quite apparent with these companies is that as they get larger, it becomes considerably harder to continue growing that exahash size. So for example, particularly percentage wise. So for example, like Marathon is moving to 50 exahash, but the movement from their current to 50 exahash is a lot lower of a percentage than Bitfarms going up to 21 exahash, even though Bitfarms going up to 21 exahash is less actual exahash in terms of total growth. So in that regard, they are going to be moving into the pretty big area at that point at 35 exahash. That will put them at fairly large. So I think that this is a pretty good update, and it's nice to see that they're continuing their growth into 2025. And I think that also alleviates some concern that they won't be growing in the future, and it makes us kind of compare it to companies such as like Iris Energy and CleanSpark, for example, who are planning large gains as well. And they haven't released their future 2025 plans, to my knowledge, at least. So Bitfarms outputting the claiming that this is their plan, kind of puts them more in line with like one of those companies at that size for 2025, assuming that they don't grow themselves, which I think is also putting it in a pretty strong space, and will be continuing its growth into the future. And so I think that overall it's going to be a pretty good catalyst for the stock, and in my opinion, for the foreseeable future, I think that the Bitfarms stock performance will likely begin to reflect the future expectations for the company because of this 21 exahash expectation, plus this now an additional 14 exahash or more expectation that's been put out into the air. I think that this information will have people start to move that company into some of the bigger hitters kind of level, and that will help drive the stock price. So really, if they could just get a CEO, I think that the company will be doing extremely well. Not financial advice, obviously, but I think that they have a lot of potential going into this bull run. So just find a CEO. How long does that take? Honestly, that's pretty much it.
I can definitely second that. So yeah, I have not that much to add to what you said, Tristan. I basically agree with all of what you just said. If they could just get the CEO thing done, I think that's kind of the last thing that's holding back Bitfarms from really rocketing. I think we got a taste of that today when it was up 15%. But I think that's just, an appetizer before the main meal, not financial advice. Let me toss it to Dom, because you haven't spoken in a while. What do you think of this hash rate expansion plan from Bitfarms?
I don't know. I'll be really quick here, but like it kind of reminds me of like a Costco membership. As silly as that sounds, it's like at face value you get the Costco membership, but you reap the benefits over a long period of time. So I think having this base news in the first place is really nice. But going into 2025, there's much improvement coming into this company. I'm sure it's going to be better for like us and everyone else and the company. So it's good news for sure.
Dom, you're really the king of analogies. So next time if there's a need for an analogy, I'll like toss it your way. Okay, so if there's nothing more to add, let's move on to our second story, because we are a little bit behind on time here, and let's pick up the pace a little. So the second story is FOMC. So this week it's another Fed day. Happy FOMC week for those who celebrate. The Fed decided to pause interest rates once again and held it steady. So the interest rate, the federal funds rate, they call it, is still at 5.25 to 5.50%. So they have not started their cuts yet. And in fact, this week's FOMC meeting is what's called an SEP FOMC meeting. SEP stands for Summary of Economic Projections. It's basically this report that they put out every quarter. So every 3 months. So they don't have a new one every single Fed meeting. But this one is special because they did put out the new one, and the new one suggests that the Fed is kind of only looking at one rate cut this year. That's their plan if everything goes according to their predictions. Before, if you guys recall, I think by the start of the year, the January one, they were predicting that there was going to be 3 rate cuts this year. But now, because the economy has kind of been, according to some metrics, a lot stronger than what everybody expected, and inflation has actually not gone down as much as a lot of people expected. So I think that's the reason why they've kind of held back their rate cut plans. But they're still projecting 1 rate cut, and they're actually they're just moving the cut to 2025. So before, they were predicting 3 rate cuts in 2025, but now they've upped that to 4 rate cuts. So it's kind of like you get 1 less rate cut this year, but you get 1 more rate cut next year. So it's kind of balancing it out, right? Yeah, that's the Fed's plan basically. And this comes off the back of a CPI report too. So it's very rare that we get FOMC and CPI on the same day, but that also happened this week. So it was like a mega Fed event. You know, there's the SEP FOMC meeting and CPI all in one day. So the CPI for May came in at 3.3% headline, and that was below expectations actually. So the expectation was 3.4%. And I believe that for the more detailed view of the CPI report, there were some sectors that were also disinflating faster than expectation, which is definitely welcome news because we want inflation to go down because a lot of people are getting hurt by inflation. So yeah, anyways, that's kind of the slew of macroeconomic news that came out of the Fed this week. So the Fed's policy is kind of starting to, we can see a divergence between the Fed's policy and the policies of other central banks. So if you guys recall last week, we talked about the Bank of Canada rate cut. So the Bank of Canada has indeed started cutting rates. And the Bank of Canada rate didn't even go as high as the federal funds rate. So we were at 5.0%, and the Bank of Canada decided to cut it down to 4.75% now. So we were 25 basis points lower than the Fed to begin with, than the US. And then we also cut another 25 basis points. So we're now 50 basis points below the federal funds rate if you compare the Bank of Canada rates. And I believe that the ECB, European Central Bank, has also started cutting rates. So kind of the US is probably the last holdout. And certainly of major economic countries, the Fed is kind of the last holdout. So the Fed is stubbornly refusing to cut rates. So let me just toss the question to you guys. Do you guys think that the Fed's plan is going to go through? Like there's only going to be one rate cut, or do you think that there's going to be, even less rate cuts, or do you think there's a chance for a rate hike even? So what are your thoughts, and what are your thoughts on kind of maybe the Fed's diverging policy compared to other central banks of other countries around the world?
So like what I think will probably happen is, I think like from what I see, or like from what I've been hearing from all these meetings, it seems like they don't really know what they're actually going to be doing until like like a few days heading towards the meeting. So depending on like what happens between now and until the next Federal Reserve meeting, whatever reports or like incidents do happen based on current news is going to affect that decision greatly. So if like, oh, people are like extremely unemployed, we can't like take this anymore, we're sinking, like some news like this, or like another news where something really bad's happening, maybe it'll like change their decision a bit. But I think to be fair for like Jerome Powell, he just doesn't want to repeat the instance of the 70s or 80s, I believe. So he's trying his best to like combat with this whole economic situation. And in terms of other countries like lowering the rate cuts, I guess they see it as like, oh, it's probably time to lower our rates now. I think it's a fair bet for us. But in hindsight of like other countries versus the US, I think the US is the main central currency of the entire world versus like other currencies just having to worry about themselves. Obviously, everything's interconnected, but mostly it's more about them rather than like everyone else. But the US is like the currency. So I think they have to put a higher amount of consideration to any of the decisions that they actually have to make. So I guess that's why Jay Powell is a little more cautious. And I mean, he might be able to actually like cut somewhere, like maybe more than what we would expect. It just depends on like the news that happens throughout the next time from this past meeting to the next one. So I swear they always just make their decisions on the whim. They don't really know until like close to the date. And this is what I've noticed. Anyways, I'll stop yapping now. That's my opinion.
They don't know what they're doing. That's one sentence that sums up the situation perfectly, in my opinion. Now,
100%.
yeah. Tristan, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that from the whole they don't know what they're doing, I kind of feel like they're kind of making it up as they go. They're like a little bit like, inflation is higher, we'll do X. Inflation is lower, we'll do Y. And I would say that inflation being still at 3.3, I understand that it's lower than their estimation. That's still relatively high compared to their target. Like their target is 2%. And obviously they don't necessarily hit 2%, but they're still in the 3% range. So it's a little bit risky from, I think, their perspective potentially to cut rates while it's higher, and that may be why they're trying to keep the rates a little higher for a little bit longer to hopefully get closer to that 2% mark that they've loved so dearly. And so in that fact, it seems that they're just kind of getting the information and then basically deciding whether they're going to cut rates based on that. So I'm not surprised to see that they're delaying their rate cuts. As we kind of talked about before, I was kind of predicting that they were going to hold off on rate cuts for a while. And so I think that it kind of sticks with my thesis that they are probably going to be keeping those rate cuts until they get closer to that 2% goal. And I think that with regards to other countries, Dom was kind of talking about how the U.S. currency is the reserve currency, and I think that basically makes the U.S. strong, a lot stronger than other countries. So they can keep their rates a little bit higher, and basically hold off on changing that interest rate downwards to alleviate their weaker economy, because they don't have a weaker economy, because they have one of the strongest currencies. So I think in that fact, I think it's more so a sign of weakness for countries to be cutting rates before they want to be. So, for example, I think the Canadian government Canadian Bank of Canada cutting rates is more so a sign of weakness than not cutting the rates, if that makes sense. And I mean, I think that I'm not saying that that's definitively the case, but I think that's kind of my sense, is that the U.S. is kind of able to maintain its plan and be strong, whereas the Canadian Bank of Canada had to reduce rates so that they can get back to that sweet debt addiction.
Yeah, I mean, talking about that, I think I talked about it in a previous episode sometime as well, where I think that I still think they will have to cut rates at least once, and that is their prediction actually in 2024. And the reason why I think that is just due to the overwhelming amount of debt that the U.S. has, right? So, imagine that the U.S. government is a household, and your household is like, many, many times, like the debt that your household owes is many, many times greater than like any amount of income that you're bringing in. But the special thing about your household is that you get to control the interest rate on the debt that you owe. So would you want that interest rate to be high or to be low? If you can control the interest rate, you'd want it to be low, right? Because if it's high, then your debt will just roll into each other and then it'll just compound. So I think that that's right now what's happening in the US, because old debt is getting rolled into the 5.25, 5.0%. And that's just long term, that's just unsustainable, right? Because I think I read a report somewhere that says that if the U.S. maintains the current federal funds rate by 2025, by beginning to mid 2025, their expenditure on debt interest payments alone, so just the interest portion, no principal payments, just the interest portion, is going to exceed the defense budget. So I think that is already kind of close to the defense budget, if not a little bit greater as of right now, actually. So it's going to far exceed the defense budget by the time that 2025 rolls around, if they don't lower interest rates. So I think that just that pressure will motivate the Fed to at least lower it once. And my original prediction was that it was going to start in either June or July. Obviously, June didn't happen. And I think that by this point, July is still sort of unlikely because I think the Fed wants to see more data, right? Which is understandable. But I think by the time, say, like September, which is the next FOMC meeting after July, I think that by the time September rolls around, the pressure is going to be incredibly great for them to lower rates. And if you look at the Fed prediction markets, it's around like a 50-50 last time I checked on whether they're going to start lowering rates in September. So I'm still standing by at least one rate cut, probably two, but I could be wrong. We'll have to see. So anyways, if there's nothing more to add to that story, why don't we move on to the next one? Because we do have still a lot of stuff to get through. So the next story is Tesla and Elon Musk. So I think, Dom, you were asking me about this in the group chat earlier that we have earlier today. So this news also came hot off the press right before we started this show. And now we got the confirmation that Tesla shareholders have voted to reapprove or reappoint, I guess, the compensation package that Elon Musk was was owed back in 2018. So in case you guys don't know what I'm talking about, the full story is that back in 2018, the Tesla board gave Elon Musk a kind of like a compensation package that stipulated certain goals that he has to hit in order to get certain rewards, right? Compensation. So this is something that's really normal in the business world, right? Except what's maybe a little bit abnormal with this package was that there was like a crazy tier, right? So the don't quote me because I don't remember the exact details, but the crazy tier was like if Elon could more than 10x the company's value in like a set amount of time, like 5 years or something, then he would get like a massive bonus, right? And this was 2018. So what ended up happening to Tesla stock? Well, if you look at Tesla's stock price in 2019 to 2021, the stock did more than a 20x. So Elon pulled it off when no one expected him to back when the package was released, right? It was kind of like you set a stretch goal, right? So imagine that you have a kid in like high school, elementary school, and you want to motivate him or her to like excel at school, and you say, hey, like I want you to get 100 on every single math test for like a whole semester, which is like almost impossible. But let's just say like somehow they did it, right? Then they would get like, I don't know, a new car or whatever, right? Like some like huge reward. So this is kind of what happened to Elon, where no one was expecting him to actually achieve the top tier, but he actually did. Now, what ended up happening though recently was that some shareholders sued Tesla in a court in Delaware, where Tesla is incorporated or was incorporated. We'll talk about that too later. But yeah, this shareholder, apparently he only had like 7 shares, which is like, $1,000 worth of shares. So somebody with like 7 shares sued Tesla saying that, hey, like this deal is unfair to shareholders because it gives Elon Musk so much money, right? It's like worth over $50 billion. It's like too much, and it's gonna like dilute shareholders because it's like it's a lot of it's in stock, right? And it's just bad for shareholders, blah blah blah, right? And normally these lawsuits are just I would say baseless in my opinion, right? Some guy with like 7 shares just randomly sues the company, like the judge should have ignored him. But what ended up happening was that shareholder didn't get ignored. The judge actually agreed with that shareholder and basically like ruled against Tesla in this case, ruled against Elon, and Elon's package ended up getting revoked, even though he already did the task that he was asked to do, which was more than 10x the company. So this seemed like super unfair to a lot of people, including myself, right? Like I was saying that this whole thing was super unfair, and Elon was saying this is super unfair. This some like Delaware liberal judge, quote unquote, That's kind of because Elon is kind of known as being a conservative leaning person now, apparently, right? And like a lot of these, like, New England states like Delaware are like very liberal. So like, a lot of people there don't like him. So, he was kind of implying that this was kind of maybe politically motivated, and some judge just decided to revoke his package that was already agreed upon. So to like kind of right this issue, the Tesla board decided to toss it back to the shareholders and make them vote again, right? It's like, shall we reinstate Elon Musk's $56 billion compensation package? And to this end, there was a lot of debate because there was like quite a big group of people, especially institutions, that maybe they came in after the 2021 big boom, right? So they bought this stock when it was high, and then because Tesla stock has not been doing well recently, they lost money. So they're kind of mad at Elon. They're blaming him for like being too distracted, working on different companies at the same time. And like, they're just arguing that they shouldn't give Elon this much money in the first place anyways. So there was actually a lot of debate as to whether Elon should get this package reinstated. So there was a lot of contention before this vote. And apparently, the retail investors were mostly on Elon's side. In fact, 90%, according to Elon, 90% of them voted to reinstate the package. But a lot of the institutions publicly came out against it. And so this was kind of hanging in the balance, and we didn't know the vote count until last night, actually, when it was first revealed that Tesla, the shareholder votes had indeed crossed the threshold for this to be reapproved. For Elon's package to be reinstated. So today, right before the show started, we did get the confirmation that indeed the package was reinstated. And also another part is that Tesla will be relocating their headquarters and their state of incorporation out of Delaware and into Texas. So, there's not going to be any more liberal judges voting against Elon in the future, hopefully, right? If that is an issue in the first place. But yeah, anyways, so I just wanted to get you guys' thoughts on this. So my question to you is, I know this is maybe the first time you're hearing about this story. I don't know how closely you guys have followed this story, but given what I've just told you, and I do believe that I presented this as, neutral, as unbiased as I possibly can. Keep in mind, I am a Tesla shareholder. So there is that. So I can't be 100% unbiased, but I've presented the story as it stands. And given what I've just told you, do you think that it was fair for this package to be reinstated? Or do you think it was unfair that Elon shouldn't have been paid this much? And like, because the money that Tesla will be paying Elon is like kind of coming out of the pockets of the company, which is coming out of the pockets of the shareholders, right? And that's kind of the main reason why people are against it. But all in all, do you think that this is fair? And do you think that, do you think that Elon should have had his package reinstated?
For me, I think it's like pretty fair. I'd say it may or may not affect us positively or negatively. Hopefully, positively. But I think he did what he was intended to do, like before like the huge Tesla like moon. I think the stock was doing relatively okay, and then he was assigned or kind of like on this package to try to 10x the company, and then he managed to accomplish that goal. So I think compensation should be in order for someone who's successfully done something. I think it's funny how like a small place in Delaware and like one judge and like one's sue is like so powerful, but apparently it is. And I guess it's good that everything worked out for Elon, and hopefully that doesn't affect us too much by like taking out too much in the company and like lowering our stock price there. But I think he deserves the money that he was intended to have, because like he did accomplish his job, and I think that's fine. But I don't know, there might be flaws within all of this, but we'll wait and see. I'm not exactly sure about that.
I think the question of, is this a bit of a waste of money for Tesla? Yeah, it kind of is, because he's got so much money already that like, does it really make a difference at this point? But at the same time, I'm also just kind of like, you guys agreed to pay him this amount if he did what he said he would do. You wouldn't have this money to offer to pay him or to give him or to even have this conversation if he hadn't done a fairly good amount of work to make this a success. So I mean, I think that they are obligated to pay him. I think that that's pretty clear to me. And so I think that probably Elon should get his money. Should Elon have been offered that amount of money in the first place? Maybe not. But you know, at the end of the day, they agreed to pay him XYZ amount, and they should probably pay him XYZ amount. Would it be better for Tesla to have 56 billion? Probably. But again, you know, they agreed.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with that, right? It's like they signed on the dotted line, and it's a contract, and I get that a judge has revoked it, but if you look at what's really fair, it's like we should pay Elon, right? And I feel like a lot of people who voted against this, they came in after the stock had already run up. So they're like, you know, I bought the stock last week and like it's already down like 5% from last week. And then now you're telling me I have to pay this guy $56 billion out of the company's pocket. Well, it's like, you know, it sucks for you that you just got into the stock after it's already run up 20x. But you know, at the time it was agreed upon, right? And it was meant to be a stretch goal. Keep in mind that, again, as I keep emphasizing, that no one believed that Elon could do this in the first place, but he did it, right? So it's kind of like the analogy that I use to steal an analogy from the mind of Dom is that imagine that you hire somebody to build a house, right? And then they like went above and beyond in the house, like everything was perfect and it exceeded your expectations in every way possible. And then you're like, actually, I'm not going to pay you in the end after the house is already done, right? So I think this is just a question of fairness. And for those people who voted against it, I think they're just being very, very short-sighted, right? They're just like, I don't want to lose money now because like if I pay Elon now, then that's less money for me now. But you got to think a little bit more long term. So long term, what ends up happening is that Elon has stated that if he doesn't own a certain percentage of Tesla, then he might take the AI portion of Tesla and then take it elsewhere and build a separate company, or he already has a company called XAI, right? So he probably would take the intellectual property out of Tesla and put it into XAI, and then that value would not accumulate in Tesla stock, and it would be a different company, right? And yeah, Elon has threatened to do this, and he absolutely has the power to do that if you piss him off. So I think that people are not being very like long-term minded when they if they voted against this, because it's like we want to give Elon more ownership in Tesla so that he can, number one, be assured that he'll like be the CEO. He can't be, you know, overthrown in a coup or something, right? He can't like lose control of the company. And because he has that reassurance that he can't be overthrown, then he's comfortable like keeping its intellectual property there to grow the company, right? Because we want Elon at the helm because he's the guy that led Tesla from basically nothing, right? Like almost bankrupt into, what's it, like $500 billion company that it is today. So I think we owe a lot to Elon. And you know, to pay him $56 billion, yes, it is a lot. And it's like, you know, why does he need more money when he's already the third or fourth richest person in the world? Like, I understand that, right? But it's not about like how rich he already is. It's just a matter of fairness, in my opinion. So that's all I have to say on that. Does anyone else have anything more to add? Nope. Okay, so if no one has anything else to add, let's move on to our final story of the day, which is a new tax. So yeah, this is unfortunate that we're talking about yet another tax, because it seems like every week we're getting hit with a new tax from the Trudeau government. So this is Canada. So, you know, Americans maybe can breathe a sigh of relief temporarily because this is Canada we're talking about. So in Canada, the current Trudeau administration is planning on a new 5%. It's been dubbed the Netflix tax. I don't actually know what the official name of it is called, but basically what it is a new tax that goes into effect on September 1st of this year, 2024, and is targeting so-called foreign streaming platforms. So Netflix and Disney, both being American companies, those would qualify as foreign in Canadian eyes, right? So what happens is that the Canadian government will start requiring these companies to contribute 5% of their Canadian revenues to this new tax. And this new tax is supposedly going to help pay for local media productions. So the Canadian government is expecting this new tax to raise about $200 million Canadian dollars annually. And obviously, as I said, this affects companies like Netflix and Walt Disney and any other companies that are based out of Canada that doesn't have connections with Canadian broadcasting content producers, or if they don't have a deal with certain companies that make Canadian specific content. So this is another great idea from our beloved Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. And I have a lot of opinions on this, as you guys can probably tell. But as to not poison you guys' thoughts, I always present the story first, right? And then I get you guys' opinion, and then I unleash like my opinion / anger. So I'll reserve that for later. But yeah, this is the story, and let me toss it to you, Dom. First, what do you think of this new tax? Do you think that this is a good thing, or do you think this is a bad thing? Do you think this is something that's needed, or what are your opinions on it in general?
Like, I don't know if this is kind of like relatable or not relatable, but kind of reminds you of like again, it might not be, but the whole situation with California raising their minimum wage. So like California's minimum wage is extremely high. Like, I guess that's beneficial for like Californians, but like it could get to a certain point where like businesses have to close down, and then that's in the end not too good. So like it could be the same thing for like Netflix and Disney. Like I guess for Canada in a sense, and the whole entire government, it can be pretty good at first, but if you begin this like train of bad reflection towards like American streaming companies, it could just like paint a bad picture for them, and then what could be just like a little bit of a tax could be like a more incentivized way of like getting these streaming platforms to leave Canada in the first place. And if these streaming platforms leave Canada, that's just a whole bucket of worseness. I think I would imagine that a lot of Canadian people actually work at these companies like Netflix and Disney. So if if for whatever reason they decide to leave Canada completely, I think that would be like really catastrophic. And I think under this legislation, or whatever you want to call it, this is like one step closer to allowing that to actually happen. So in the end, I think this is the play. Like, I'm sure there's other ways to tax these American companies or like these streaming companies, and I just don't think this is the way, because who knows? Like, what if like what's Justin doing? Okay, no, I want to stay neutral as possible. But what's the Canadian government doing? Like, this is like nudging me the incorrect way. Like, I feel like I have less of an incentive to want to stay in, and I want to make an effort to like head out over Canada, and maybe make it like unavailable for Canadians. Like, this is ridiculous. I could just have my business elsewhere. So if it gets to that point, then it's really bad. So I don't know if this is the play.
I can tell you probably agree with what I'm going to say, but you're like holding back a little, which I'm not going to do later. But let Tristan speak first.
Yeah, so the whole taxing Netflix thing, again, I understand that it's basically going to all be passed on to us in the end, because I'm sure Netflix is going to raise its prices to cover the tax. Maybe not to cover the entire tax, maybe to cover some of it, maybe to cover all of it, you know, however they choose to handle that is kind of what's going to happen. But what it really comes down to is that, at least in my opinion, for this tax on the Netflix and stuff is what the money is actually going to be used for. And I don't know if did you mention that already? What the tax money is going to be used for? I'm not sure if I caught it.
I have not. So why don't you take into that?
Yes. So if I recall correctly, our good friend Justin wants to take this money and toss it into Canadian content and Canadian cultural content and Aboriginal stuff. Basically funding like Canadian specific CRTC content. And I don't know about you, but personally for me, if you're going to go to all the effort to tax these companies, I'd kind of rather like that money to be spent on something of substance, something of value. And to me, taking this money and putting it into Canadian culture content just seems like a giant waste of money. And so, in my opinion, this money would be much better suited to go to something that provides a lot of value. And again, my thought process is usually returns to infrastructure, such as like nuclear power plants and like something to that effect, something where I can see the value proposition for it. It's an expensive thing. Having the government pay for it is maybe a little bit more convenient because it's an expensive thing. This just seems like another area where we get taxed more and we have nothing to show for it. And I'm not really into that because, again, I'm not going to willingly watch whatever CRTC Canadian culture stuff that you put out. Like, I'm just not going to choose to watch that. That's not something I'm interested in. So I would rather either pay less for my Netflix or you invest that money into something that is going to be making our future generations better, such as a nuclear power plant. And maybe that's a controversial take, but I think that's really what it comes down to for me is that if you're going to tax, use the money for something of value, and if you're not gonna use it for something of value, just don't tax me.
I mean, I don't think that that's unreasonable at all, right? That's pretty much exactly what I was gonna say, which is, why are we stuck in this mentality that because you're taxing something from like one sector that it has to go back into the same sector, right? So for example, like it's like if you're taxing content streaming platforms, then the tax money must go into other content streaming platforms that we like more, that are Canadian, quote unquote, right? It's like, no, why does it have to, they're tax dollars, right? Just allocate them elsewhere to like non-content. You're allowed to do that. Did you know you can do that? Right? It's like, I don't think Trudeau knows that he could spend money elsewhere other than just the same area that he took the money out of. So yeah, if it was the crux of the problem isn't even the tax itself, like what Tristan, you said, the crux of the problem is where they're spending this money on. And if they were spending this money on building a new high-speed rail, right, I wouldn't complain, right? Or I wouldn't complain as hard. Maybe I'll still complain a little. It's like, why does it have to be, why does the tax have to come from, this sector versus that sector? We can have a debate on that, but at least you'd have like something to show for it, like what Tristan was saying, right? So basically, this was kind of this Netflix tax thing was picked up by Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the Conservatives, as well, and he tweeted about this, and he says that you are going to be the one, you being like everyday Canadians, are going to be the one who will be paying more for streaming because of Trudeau's new Netflix tax, and this is not worth the cost. All right, that's one of his taglines: is Trudeau's not worth the cost. And I actually think that he was being too tame here, which is like, to you might be kind of like shocking, right, to everybody, because it's like, Pierre Poilievre tries to like own Justin as hard as he can, like every opportunity he gets. But I think that he didn't actually even like go far enough here, because The truth is much worse. The truth is that, and I tweeted this, and I quote tweeted Pierre, and I said that it's not just that, right? It's not just that Canadians will be paying more for Netflix. Is that what Trudeau is doing is basically making up a tax that totally doesn't need to exist, right? There's no reason why this tax should be a thing in the first place. I don't think other countries really have the same tax as far as I've heard, right? Like other countries are not taxing, in foreign streaming platforms or whatever. So this tax definitely does not need to exist. This tax is being implemented to punish corporations for a supposed injustice that doesn't exist, right? Trudeau's trying to hit on this point that foreign companies are, scalping Canadians by like charging them, and like, the money's not staying in Canada, it's leaving, it's going to the US in this case, right? It's like, yeah, there's a lot of companies that do business in Canada, but the profits go back into an American company. It's not just streaming companies, right? You could say that about just about any company. And he's also breaking a campaign promise, by the way, to not drive up the cost of living for everyday Canadians, because guess what? It's not just the rich that uses Netflix. I think most people have a Netflix account, whether you're, considered rich or middle class or even poor, right? Like, even people who are lower in income, they can probably, dish out $20 a month. If you add up the cost, it's not that much, right? So he's raising the cost of living for everyday Canadians, which is breaking a campaign promise, while funneling the money into a government-sponsored propaganda machine that is the CRTC. And I can hear the complaints already. People are going to be like, CRTC is a regulatory body. They're not a government propaganda machine. Like, look, the CRTC under these new laws, and not just the Netflix tax, but like a whole bunch of other online streaming acts that the Liberal government has passed, the CRTC has become a ministry of truth. If you ever read 1984, right? Like they determine what is Canadian enough to be prioritized. Well, if you're not Canadian, then your videos will get deranked and stuff like that. They have the power to do that now because Trudeau gave them the power, right? So in this case, what I could see happening, and I'm not saying that this is happening 100% for sure, but we're basically giving them the power to determine, hey, like this stuff says good things about the current government, so I'm going to prioritize it. I'm going to bump it. And then this stuff is from a critic of our beloved Prime Minister Trudeau, so I'm going to derank it, right? They theoretically would have the power to do that. And we can debate about whether or not they're actually exercising that power, but how about we don't give the CRTC that power in the first place, right? But unfortunately, this is not the case. It's like we've already given the CRTC this power, and then they've essentially become a government sponsored ministry of truth, a propaganda machine, if you will, right? So this is kind of my point that I was trying to make with my tweet. And I made a second tweet that is kind of long, so bear with me here. I'm going to try and go quickly. I just kind of was trying to summarize this whole issue. And I believe that a chronic problem that our current government in Canada faces is the inability to see the second and third order effects of their actions. So it is perhaps true that increasing taxes on the wealthy will only directly affect a small number of Canadians. However, these things like proposed changes in the capital gains tax, which we talked about in a previous episode, they affect small businesses, right? So we talked about this issue where Canada is going through a huge doctor shortage right now. Many Canadians can't find a family doctor. I think it's like a quarter or a third or something like that. It's a large amount, millions of people. And many doctors in Canada operate as small businesses. And that also includes like dentistry, optometry, by the way, right? Which are also in short supply. So when you raise taxes on these doctors that are operating as small businesses, what do you think happens to the doctor's shortage problem? It's going to become worse, right? And this is also what I said about the carbon tax. While it's true that not everyone drives, right? So the first order effect is that gasoline prices go up, and then people are like, "Oh, that doesn't affect me. I don't own a car. I live in like downtown Toronto. I don't pay for my own gas." Well, it's not just about the gas prices, because and this is not just about the people working at the oil companies or shareholders of oil companies. It's about the second and third order effects. How do you think groceries get to the grocery store? Think of any good or service that you use on a daily basis. And if you trace the supply chain, chances are, if you trace it back enough, there is fossil fuels required at some point down the line. So if you raise the carbon tax, so you raise the cost somewhere down the line of the supply chain, it causes ripple effects throughout the entire supply chain. And what's ends up happening is that everyone like pays more in the end, right? Everything gets more expensive for everybody. To summarize, a lot of Canada's current economic problems can either be solved or at least made less dire by just thinking about these problems deeper and being more considerate when you're implementing these economic policies. So this isn't complicated. A first-year university course can teach you all the economics you need to not make these stupid decisions. However, our politicians are very insistent on digging Canada deeper into the hole. And this is exactly what is happening with this new Netflix tax. And yeah, again, it's like every week I'm hearing about a new tax, and it's honestly getting incredibly frustrating. If you look at any statistics, the kind of cost of living on a relative basis for Canadians on a per capita basis is at like, multi-decade lows, right? I think, maybe only like if you go back to the Great Depression or something, maybe it's probably lower back then, right? But it's been the lowest in my living lifetime, and I'm almost 30, right? So it's pretty bad, and it's a shame that the Canadian government just absolutely does not recognize how dire this situation is, and the Liberal government is somehow surprised when they put out this new budget that raises taxes a bunch of people, that their polling numbers go down. So the last graphic that I have on the docket is a picture of the latest polls from 338 Canada, which is a polling aggregator. And you can see the Liberals, which are in red, and their polling numbers just kind of plummeting. And they've been in straight decline since mid 2023. And it doesn't show signs of stopping anytime soon. So, yeah, apparently their policies are not working, and then they're also surprised that they're not working, which is incredibly, incredibly frustrating. So, let me toss the question back to you guys. Do you guys have any responses to what I said? Do you agree with what I said? And yeah, what are your thoughts on Canada's situation in general, and what role that economic policy of the government has had to play in this crisis that we're facing?
I'll go really quick here. I think I'll just piggyback off that like 338 Canada popular vote projection. Um, it's not even just in the Western Hemisphere. I think it's also in the Eastern Hemisphere, if I said that correctly. Like, there's a lot of news in like the European Union of a lot of political systems leaning towards another direction. Maybe it's just because people are tired of like one way, and it's time for like the switch. Um, I support like damn, what am I gonna say here? I'm pretty neutral, but like I'm typically like a liberal, but I think it when one side is like going on for too long, it's time to switch, and then maybe eventually there's going to be a switch again, and then I guess people are starting to realize that. So not only here in Canada, I think society is switching to like another direction. It seems it's very like left focused right now, I guess. But I don't want to say too much about that. I'll stay neutral as possible. I'll support whoever does the best for the citizens of Canada and the rest of the world too as well. So, and I think the policies that you were stating and like the issues and problems that you, by the way, you previously mentioned in like other episodes of the podcast too, I think would be a better way to like combat with like using the tax instead of like regulating like uh whatever you want to call it. Is it CTR? I forgot, but regulating like Canadian media to make it seem like everything's more Canadian. I think fixing the problems that you mentioned instead would be like a lot better. And yeah, I'll just leave it at that. I'm sure Tristan has a lot more to chime into as well. So we'll get to that.
Yeah, I'll kind of I think this kind of alludes to what I was kind of speaking to previously. I don't particularly like taxes that I feel like don't do anything. They don't provide any value. And the problem with the Liberals the last little bit is that they've seemingly been adding a lot of taxes that don't really do anything. Because, in my opinion, the CRTC stuff, obviously, as I mentioned before, doesn't really do anything. There's like basically very little value that I see for having that tax go into that government tool, whatever it is, organization. So I don't see much value in my life, and honestly, I don't think most people will see much value from that. And it's not to say that we shouldn't support Canadian content. It's just that I don't think that we should be expecting I don't think we should be trying to fund it and then kind of ram it down our throats, right? Like, I think that the Canadian content should kind of stand on its own 2 feet, rather than be shoved down our throats so that we can only consume it over something else. And it's not to say that like they shouldn't make efforts to put Canadian content, give maybe more opportunities to have Canadian content where they, like singers, for example, like allow them to get a platform so that they can grow into a more of a larger one, and maybe some incentives for that is fine. But again, it's just like adding this additional tax in to give us something that is basically something nobody asked for seems really, really not ideal. And then with regards to the carbon tax, we kind of beat this one to death a little bit, but again, it's just kind of feels like the carbon tax doesn't really, whether it is or isn't going to make the average person's money back. It really feels like the main thing with the carbon tax is just a reshuffling of money rather than an actual tax that something beneficial will come out of at the end, right? It's not like we're doing this carbon tax and then I turn around and, oh, the entire Alberta is now off natural gas. We're completely green energy now. Great. No, it's like, just I take money from this spot and I give it to this spot. And that just feels like, and it feels like it's not really super beneficial to the average person. I think that, and I think that a lot of these taxes are kind of falling in that range where it's just, no, I don't think anyone can really see the value proposition that they're receiving. And so I think it's a lot easier to justify paying taxes when you can see the value proposition, right? Like, and the problem with the way they've kind of set it up is that because of how all these additional taxes that we're seeing coming in with no additional gain to ourselves, and then we have all these other problems that our taxes should be paying for that are still ongoing. And then it's kind of like, why am I paying all this tax and then not receiving the value that I'm expecting to get from paying that tax? Like, why? And if I'm not going to receive it, why am I paying the tax?
That's a really good point. And just to hammer on that, like, because I've gotten into like Twitter fights with like random strangers when I like come out against the carbon tax, because it's like, a lot of people, I don't know, I feel like there's a certain portion of people, and maybe it's magnified on Twitter because people are polarized, like super polarized on Twitter. But there's a small percentage of Canadians, I feel, that are somehow like, of this belief that they're, morally superior, doing such a great thing by paying this carbon tax. And they're so happily willing to give the government their money for whatever reason. I can't fathom why, right? And then when I come out against the carbon tax, they're like, oh, you hate the environment. You just want the oil companies to screw us over and over again. You want the oil companies to like pollute us and destroy our environment. And it's like, no, like, let me toss the question back to you, actually. Like, can you name one thing that the carbon tax made better environmentally, right? Like, I've actually asked people this, and there's no one that can name one thing specifically, right? Like, don't just say it made the environment better in general, because even if you say that, that's a statement that lacks evidence, in my opinion. But point to one thing, right? Just be like, hey, here in like southern Alberta, like we got a new conservatory for animals because it was funded by the carbon tax, where it wouldn't have happened before if the carbon tax didn't exist. Or like, name something, right? Name a project that the carbon tax helped fund. Name something, right? I haven't heard of a single thing that the carbon tax went into. And then when I bring up this fact, people are like, oh, just go do some research, right? Go do some research. And like, I'm sure there are programs that the carbon tax funded. It's like, okay, first of all, I've tried and I haven't found any. And second of all, if they're buried that deep that I can't like even look, I can't even find one program that was funded by the carbon tax after like 5 pages of Google, then like maybe it's up to maybe it's the government's fault, right? Like maybe they're the ones that are not spending this money properly. And in fact, I know they're not spending this money properly because they're giving it out to people in the form of a carbon rebate. And I got a carbon rebate too, right? And guess what I did with my carbon rebate? I went out and I bought a tank of gas. So a lot of the times I feel like, people just assume that, oh, because it's a carbon tax and the government's going to take this money and make the environment better, I'll just believe them and happily volunteer my money. And it's like, you guys need to think a little bit deeper, right? Like, I'm open to more taxation if it means that the money is actually being well spent. But I think it's pretty clear to me, and I don't see how you could see it any like other case, that the carbon tax money is not being well spent. And maybe the last point, and then we'll wrap up. So looking back at this poll, this 338 poll, there's 25% of Canadians that are still supportive of the Liberals, despite all the bad policies that we've discussed on this channel, on previous episodes, this episode and previous episodes. So that 25%, that's pretty significant. That's a quarter, right, of all Canadians are still supportive of the Liberals. And my question is, why? Like just why? like explain to me. Like, I'm not trying to be like super partisan. I'm just like, because I can see somebody explore like supporting the NDP, right? Because they're like, you can make an argument that, hey, like they're a left-leaning party and they're more similar to the Liberals compared to the Conservatives, and I don't want to vote the Conservatives because I don't want to vote for a right-wing party, and the NDP has never been in charge, so let's give them a chance, right? So I can see how somebody would maybe justify voting for the NDP, but why would someone still vote for the Liberals after all they've done? Like, I'm really trying to understand, right? Like listen, I know it sounded like I'm just being super biased and being super partisan, but just put yourselves in the shoes of a Liberal supporter and like think things through with the logic. And I can't arrive at a logical conclusion as to why somebody would still support Trudeau at this point. But maybe you guys, by you guys I mean Dom and Tristan, maybe you guys can and maybe even audience members, put it down in the comments. If you are a Liberal supporter, explain why. Or if you're not a Liberal supporter, explain why you think people are still supportive of the Liberals. But yeah, anyways, let me toss the question back to you guys. Like, why are there still 1 in 4 Canadians that are still supportive of Trudeau?
I think I'll just wrap this up real quick. It's the difference between conservative people who are probably sick and tired of all these policies and are drowning in liabilities and payments and debts that are oh, we just need a government change because I want to be able to afford things. I'm sick and tired of the circumstances of society and the economics and etc. But with the people who support the Liberal Party are probably doing well. And they prioritize people's rights and stuff like that. So I can see why people would still vote Liberal, just because I think the rights of people and humans are still a good thing. But in hindsight, they're probably really wealthy and live in Bridlewood, Toronto, same area as Drake or something, and are probably filthy rich, so they don't have to worry about slight conveniences like the carbon tax versus the average Canadian who does have to worry about carbon tax and it being really expensive, and that being like the difference between food on the table and not. And I suppose that's why people are voting conservative, because they just want to change. But people want to be liberal still just because they still got money in the bank. I'm pretty sure that's it, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, so I think that I can kind of uh, guesstimate why the people are still liberal, and I think that there's going to be a few buckets of people. So, for example, I think there's one bucket of people who has always voted liberal. That they voted liberal in the last election, they're going to vote liberal in the next election. They're going to vote liberal from the day they were born to the day they die. Right? There's going to be some people who are just lifelong liberals. Same thing with conservatives. There's always people in these camps that they're like, red's my color, blue's my color, orange is my color. I don't care besides that. I've always voted for the blues. I've always voted for the reds, right? So I think that is definitely an aspect. Now, that's not to say that is the majority of people. I just want to add that as a fairly consistent reason that anyone votes for any of these parties at a consistent basis, regardless of their value proposition. Because again, I don't think most people know what the value proposition of each of these political parties are to themselves. Oftentimes, I found that people tend to vote against their best wishes or their best interests, election-wise, either way. So anyway, to bring it back to the question of why people would be voting for the liberals, and I think that there's going to be another camp that would be the people who don't think the NDP ever have a chance of getting in. So they aren't going to throw their vote away into the NDP camp, and they definitely don't want the conservatives, so they aren't going to vote for the conservatives. So they're in a spot where their only option is the liberals, at least in their mind, because the NDP is essentially akin to throwing away your vote, in their opinion, because they're never going to get into power. And then their alternative is the conservatives, and they don't like the conservatives. So I think there's a large group of people who are in there. And I think that those people tend to be the people who are like on like Reddit and stuff, who are like the people who are like, ooh, Trudeau's not that bad. I think it's mostly those kind of people who are like trying to kind of justify their opinion that the conservatives are bad. Trudeau isn't that bad. And that the liberals are better than the NDP because the NDP is never going to get elected. And so they're kind of having to defend a weak liberal government because of that fact, because they've kind of put themselves in a position where they're they don't believe in any of the other parties as much as they believe in the liberals, and they've kind of just put themselves in a box. And so in that regard, I don't think that I think most of the people who are swing voters, I think, have left the liberal camp. So I think we're getting down to like the people who are too politically left to ever vote conservative, but don't believe the NDP is going to win, or they are. And I think there's also maybe a smaller subset that is too centrist, but don't like the conservatives. Maybe they just don't like Pierre, who will still vote liberal because they don't like Pierre, and the NDP is too left. So I think there's going to be a box there. So I think that there's a fair number of reasons why one would vote the liberal, but I think it's pretty clear to me that the majority of the people who are kind of in the swing voter camp, where they're like, sometimes I vote liberal, sometimes I vote conservative, sometimes I vote NDP, depending on what the policies they're offering are. I think pretty much all of those people have jumped ship from the liberals. And I think that's what we're really seeing with the liberal approval rate tanking. I think is that those swing voters just dipping all sides, either to NDP or to the conservatives.
I'll say, like, I'm one of those swing voters, right? Like, sometimes I vote liberal, sometimes I vote conservatives, and sometimes I voted NDP in the past too. That might have been a surprising fact to people who have watched me, because it doesn't seem like it that I would vote NDP, but I have, right? And yeah, I just think that so I'm being a swing voter. I think I'm trying to be like in the middle, right? But I just think that given the track record of what the Liberals have done in the past few years, I think it's absolutely nuts that people are willing to vote for the Liberals again and give them power for another 4 years, given what has happened in the past 4 years or so. But yeah, I mean, it's just it's like, you know, one of those like movies where you get betrayed by your best friend, and like like your best friend has like a gun to your head and they're about to shoot you, and then at that point you're just giving up. You're just defeated. You're not even mad. You're just like, you can shoot me, just tell me why. Right? Like, I'm at that point where it's like there's 25%, and those 1 in 4 Canadians are still willing to give Trudeau another 4 years. And at this point, I'm like, I'm not even mad. Just tell me why. On that note, let's end the show. If no one has anything more to add, this is a spicy show for you, for us, for all of us tonight. So let me pass it to Dom for the outro then.
Alrighty, guys. So I hope you guys enjoyed our show here for today. So be sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe to our main channel as well as our clips channel too as well, on top of our personal channels. And with that being said, see you later, guys. Peace out.
Have a good one.
Thanks for watching. See you next time.